Welcome to Ewart Hall at the American University in Cairo. I'm Atia from the Tahrir Cultural Center here at AUC, and I'm honored to be your host for tonight's event with the amazing Serhan. Before we start our conversation with May, and before I introduce her more formally, I'd just like to say a few words about this talk series that we're launching here at TCC tonight. TCC is Tahrir Cultural Center. Creative Writing in English is the name of the series we're launching, and via this subject we're hoping to highlight an important phenomenon. So why is it a phenomenon? Because if you had to name Egyptians or others from this part of the world who were primarily writing in English creatively in the past, you may have named just one or two well-known writers over the course of several decades. From the 60s, Wagi Ghali comes to mind. In the 90s, Ahdaf Suif. But now, it's nearly every day, or at least that's what it seems like sometimes, that we hear of a budding talent or established practitioner who is creating world-class literature in English. I think there are a lot of reasons for this shift, and we'll definitely be exploring those reasons over the course of this series. Tonight, we'll also be covering some ground in that regard, with the conversation continuing in our next two events in the series, which, please mark your calendars, will take place on May 2nd and on June 20th. I'll save the names of the main speakers for those two nights till we announce them formally, but I'm sure they will be just as impressive as tonight's. This series is being held in partnership with two very important entities. The first is the Department of English and Comparative Literature, and I would like to thank all of the professors and students involved for their participation and enthusiasm, and especially Dr. Martin Morrow. The second entity is the AUC Literature Club, and again, many thanks to the students who are involved in that very important club, and especially its president, Nadia Faisal Siam. I'd also like to thank Professor Feryal Ghazul for her wholehearted support for this project. Thank you very much. We are certainly following in your footsteps when it comes to events such as these. And last but certainly not least, the brainchild behind this whole thing, Dr. Samia Mehrez, former director of the Center of Translation Studies and Professor Emeritus of Modern Arabic Literature, without whom none of this would have been possible. And now on to the main event. Tonight's conversation is called Writing Across Genres, a conversation about prose, poetry, and literary translation. I'll be speaking with May Serhan about these subjects with which she has an intimate familiarity. May is an May is a Palestinian-Egyptian writer, editor, and translator. She earned her BA in English and Comparative Literature and her MA in Arabic Literature from the American University in Cairo, and an MST in Creative Writing from the University of Oxford. She writes across genres, short stories, poetry, memoir, but has self-confessed to preferring to blur these genres altogether. Her upcoming memoir, Return is a Thing of Amber, has won her the Narratively Memoir Prize in 2022. Her poetry collection, Cairo, the Undelivered Letters, won the Center for Book Arts Poetry Chapbook Award, also in 2022. And her translation of Sayyid Darwish's songs, Ahodal Lisar, or This Is What Has Come to Be, was published by AUC Press in 2018. And that's exactly how tonight's conversation will be divided, specifically into four parts. The first about writing in general, and then each of the genres will get a part: memoir, poetry, and translation. Afterwards, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to join the conversation. So let's get right into it with a very simple question. May, are you ready?
I'll try.
Okay. All right. Why did you start writing? And how did you get into poetry and fiction and now memoir?
Okay. I started writing. I've always known how to write, but it started actually in university when I did my BA in English and Comparative Literature. actually before that, I was almost on probation because I didn't know what I was going to do. And I declared many majors: political science, mass comm, psychology. And then my parents got a letter saying like she might be on probation next semester. So, and at that point I was taking a seminar in English world literature, and my professor called me into his office. I thought I was in trouble again, and I had written an essay about Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And I went in and he said, "This is really good. Have you considered declaring literature?" And that's how it started, really. And after the BA, I didn't know what to do with my major, so I decided to get a paying job, and I became a copywriter. And I moved to Dubai, and I worked in advertising for 9 years. Until one day I just decided I'm sick of it, and I don't want to be selling real estate services or banking services, so I quit. I moved to New York briefly for 6 months, and I took a screenwriting course. And then I came back to Egypt. I wrote 2 screenplays, never did anything with them. It just felt like, there wasn't enough creative authority when you're doing film, because once you finish a script, it goes into many hands. So I just didn't like that. I wanted to do my own thing. So I went back to university. I did a master's in Arabic literature. And when I finished, I have a friend who used to be a professor at AUC, May Hawes. She had read my stories, and let me backtrack a bit. I hadn't written any stories until one day my partner asked me, he said, you need to write stories. I'm going to take the baby. We had a baby at that time. And he said, I'm going to leave you for 4 hours, and when I come back, I want a story. And I wrote a story in 4 hours. And it became part of a collection that also I didn't do anything with. And then I submitted one of these stories to Anomaly, which was an American literary journal that was inviting Egyptian writers from all over the world to comment about the Arab Spring. And that was my first story to be published. And then I submitted it to the Madeleine Lamont Literary Prize, and I was very surprised that it won. And that's it. I started writing and getting published. But then I felt like I want to hone my craft even more. Like I want to learn how to do it at the optimum level. So I started applying for MFAs in the States, and I applied to Oxford, and that's the one that accepted me. I got rejected everywhere else, and that's how it started, yeah.
You tell part of the story that you just told in the memoir, yeah. And you tell it in different ways, but we're going to save the memoir for a minute. I first have to ask you a very specific question related to this series. Why do you write in English?
Why do I write in English? Do you write in English?
I also write in English, yes.
Yeah. So I write in English because I grew up in a bilingual house. First of all, like English was spoken around me since I was a kid. Also because naturally, my father being Palestinian, his family are scattered all over the world, so it's a very international family. So we got to travel a lot as kids, and I went to a private English school, and then an American university, and then again a British university. So it's the language that I have the strongest command of.
We're gonna get a little bit more into that subject once we start talking about the memoir. We're gonna start talking now about your memoir. So basically, I want to first introduce the name of the memoir. It's called Return is a Thing of Amber. And I'm going to ask you a little bit about the context for the title, but first I want to maybe just give the audience, because I was lucky enough to have a chance to read the whole memoir in preparation for this talk. Everybody else, you can read until it's published. It's in the publishing process now. You can read the first 25 pages. They're online. They're the ones by which May won the prize. It's pretty amazing, so I highly recommend you go into the site and read it. The memoir is telling almost 3 stories at the same time. It's telling the story of May's father and his business in China, and how he at one point asks you to join him, and then there's kind of a whole track which is almost like a whodunit adventure story about May and her dad in China. There's another track that's very specifically about Palestine, and you trying to recreate the history of your family in Palestine. And then there's a third part that just kind of covers your life in Cairo and your family. So tell us more about the context. Why did you decide to call it Return as a thing of amber, and how does that relate to those 3 tracks?
So let me just elaborate on the story first. The story has 3 plot lines. The main one takes place in China, and it's in 2 parts. The first part is when I join my dad a year before he dies, and just our very fraught relationship in China. And at that point, he had severe diabetes, and he developed gangrene in his foot, and all these events leading up to his death with he had to amputate his foot, and that became kind of a metaphor in the book for exile and just movement. So that's the main plot, and then you have another subplot where I recreate Palestine for him posthumously, specifically our little village in the north, which was called El Kabri. It doesn't exist anymore. And I do that in order to heal him, and also as an act of defiance, because this place no longer exists. I felt like, okay, I have never been. Let's imagine it. Let's imagine it to the maximum. And then I have a third plot line with my formative years, the 80s and 90s, growing up at home. And that's where I trace the origin of my story. It deals with intergenerational trauma and exile, and how that plays out within the dynamics of one family. So these are the plot lines, and why Return is a thing of amber. Return being obviously the right of return, but here it's a different kind of return, because I return through my imagination. So it is an act of defiance, and amber for me, the book has a lot of references to anger being like fire that catches up and can eat everything, and discovering writing as the way of abating this fire, or making it more of a gentle flame that can guide and settle you down. So amber being that settling, gentle flame. But amber is also fossil, and fossil for me is, the book starts with my dad having his foot amputated, and I describe him as the fossil of a dinosaur. So amber being fossil, amber being illumination, and amber being a scent that follows me everywhere. So that's it.
So you asked me if I write in English. I do write in English, and my sort of favored genre of writing or type of writing is creative nonfiction. And this is also an example of creative nonfiction, isn't it, this book?
Yes, yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about what that means to you?
The book is not actually, I've always wondered if I should classify it as a memoir or a piece of literature, because it does stand in between these 2 genres. You have a true story, but you also have Palestine, which is a metaphor, and that whole plot line is imagined. So that's how it kind of blurs the lines between fact and fiction. But also, this story is not a telling, it's a narration, so it's more of a narrative, a literary narrative. It is consciously constructed. I have created it very intentionally on every level. It has a dramatic arc. It combines epistolarity, because the plot line where I reimagine Palestine is all a letter from me to my dad. It's also a historical account. It breaks into poems sometimes. And it's an essay that reflects on the events. When the events are really fast, I kind of slow down and reflect on these events. But also how I design structure, because it's a very fractured narrative. It's very circular, reflecting the pattern of trauma. It kind of expands in a circular manner, expanding on meaning rather than a linear movement. So I feel like I am not telling a true story. I'm not the narrator, I'm the author. The narrator is someone who lived these events 20 years ago, so I am a very different person now, so it is a narrative, and I am a character in the book. Yeah, so, and at the center of all this, Palestine is a metaphor, so it is creative nonfiction. It's not purely fact.
And how does this also relate to blending genres?
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned here that, you know, it's sort of blending between fact and historical narrative and memoir and a lot of other things. Can you bring in also this idea of genres?
Yeah, well, the idea of blending genres is something that really excites me. My MFA, or they call it MST there, was a hybrid program, so we got to write in every genre. We did screenplay, theater, playwriting, radio, podcasts, poetry. We worked in every genre, so the idea of blending genres was really exciting to me. But also I feel like the idea of genre is it's something that has been created by an establishment, a literary establishment, and it just kills originality, really. Like, there are no musts. Why should we say this is a genre and this is another genre? Like, just experiment and be original. And it's kind of reinforcing law and order on art, which is counterproductive, I think. What else?
Well, that in itself is kind of inspiring for anybody who's writing and sort of is in between trying to decide where they're going to write. You're kind of saying, break all the rules. Don't consider these rules. And I think it would be really useful right now if you would agree for you to read an excerpt, because even in that maybe excerpt that you may have chosen, there may be that blurring of genres. Are you willing to read us an excerpt from the book?
Not really.
Okay, that's kind of embarrassing. All right, can you guys help out here? Do you want May to read an excerpt of the book? Please, excerpt. Listen. Thank you, May. Can we get the microphone to work at the podium?
Might have run out of battery, I think.
Hold on, someone's coming up. Thank you.
Cairo, 1994. Our bedroom on Arabi Street is a two-state solution. Nermeen occupies the left side. Books. I'm going to start from the beginning, sorry. Our bedroom on Arabi Street is a two-state solution. Nermeen occupies the left side. Books line her shelves over an unmade bed. She loves Trotsky and Agatha Christie, revolution and murder mysteries. In her free time, Nermeen reads her encyclopedia, the encyclopedia Mama had gifted her from A to Z, alphabetically. She's an old soul, dreams to the croons of Abdul Halim Hafiz and bops to Elvis Presley. There's a sticker on Nermeen's desk drawer. It's colored in shades of the Palestinian flag over a sign of victory. On her desk is a tiny cup filled with soil. I ask her what it is, and she says, "It's from Palestine. A friend bought it back for me from Al-Kabri." I poke it with my index finger, and it touches something unknown in me. I occupy the right side of the bedroom. I have a diary with a lock and key where I keep my love stories, a tall CD rack with all the greatest hits, and my walls are covered in posters of teen celebrities. Nermeen and I share a bedroom in Abu Dhabi and many times over in Cairo. We share a bedroom until she marries, and until then we fight like cats and dogs from home to home and room to room. While we do, our father moves from country to country chasing the buck. He tries his hand at a few jobs and recycles failures with no luck, then comes back. When he comes back, I wait for him by the window, for his head and bags to pop out of some car pulling up. Nermeen and I fight like cats and dogs until one day it's my mother and Nermeen and I, and my father is Puff, gone. Cairo, 2000. He's in China now, or on Mars, finally making it big, busy building an empire in the export business. He comes to Cairo from time to time with bags full of Chinese catalogs, product samples, and scraps of cloth. I wish for gifts which he never brings, and yet I rummage through his bags nevertheless. I search his suitcase one day and find a photo in a picture frame. The photo is of a young Chinese woman carrying a baby girl. I ask him who they are. Is she his new wife? Is this his baby? But Baba lowers his gaze and slips from room to room. The apartment on Arabi Street is bare, except for the bare necessities. The ceramic floors are rugless, the walls are naked, and there are no plants to tend. My mother, no longer daddy's girl, nor any man's woman, goes to work to make a living. For us, she takes some basic computer skill courses and becomes a secretary in a business hotel by the pyramids. Baba calls one day, he dials +202, he calls us. "Listen, I'm getting old, and I'm running a huge business here. If I go, it goes with me. Unless you come and I show you the ropes." Come where? To China. To China? If you come, it's going to be yours one day. If you don't, you lose it all. You'll have everything you want here. But Baba, I don't know anything about business. I studied literature. Literature? What are you going to do with that? Be a writer? I go to China. I go because where I'm from is not on the map no more, so I seek the edges and overlook the borders. I go because I've inherited a gene that roams, and the restless foot is mine to bear too. The ghosts of the past are calling me. They are asking me to follow in their footsteps, to keep walking out and out. To stop is to know I'm out of place, so I move from place to place. Perhaps in the strangest lands I might cease to be a stranger. Perhaps my father's got it all worked out, so I follow. Two Palestinian renegades running towards the outposts, thinking we can leave ourselves behind, thinking we can run until we vanish, like all our ghosts. Shenzhen, China, 2000. It is not uncommon for Levantine men to use the word mara when referring to a woman, derogatory to my Egyptian sense, pretty much like harma, which means sacred, but also taboo and prohibited, like a whore. It's the year before the amputation, and I tag along behind Baba and his Palestinian client up the busy streets of Shenzhen, feeling very much like a mara, though I'm halfway around the world, though I'm nowhere near the Levant. Fresh hair, lean body, I'm dangerous cargo for these two Arab men, a discomfort. It's my second day in China and everything seems extraterrestrial, like I've tapped into an augmented reality. On my right, counterfeit designer merchandise is lined up along the sidewalk before storefronts decked with the wackiest avant-garde streetwear. Hip-hop inspired Chinese silhouettes, grungy tweeds, silk embroidered goth corsets, anime and manga prints on American vintage t-shirts. And on my left, docks steaming with free chips and black smoke, heaving with the moist odor of deep-fried chicken feet. Baba and his client enter a cafe and sit next to each other. I watch them order coffees and fill ashtrays with cigarette butts. I listen to them make deals, lock orders, discuss containers, shipments, commissions. I'm fresh off the boat. Only 2 days ago I was in Cairo. I want to interrupt, to tell him it's hot and humid, and I haven't packed for this weather, that I need flip-flops instead of these socks and sneakers. But Baba wants me to listen, sit quietly, invisibly. They finish their meeting and a pack of Rothmans between them and carry their conversation back to the street. I spot a large container of vintage t-shirts. A cardboard sign reads, 3 for $1. Baba, can I have $1? I ask. He stops, inconvenienced, and starts to haggle with the old Chinese woman. He wants all 3 t-shirts for 50 cents. She waves her hand a firm no. He chucks the t-shirts back in the container and walks off. I stand in place, wait to see if he'll turn back, acknowledge me, but he doesn't. I follow him until we reach his Shenzhen address, an office. I follow him until we reach his Shenzhen address, an office apartment on the 33rd floor of a skyscraper. At the entrance, the security guard gawks. We're a rare sight, I get it, especially me. It's the year 2000 and Chairman Mao might be long gone, but it's still early days for China's global emergence. There are no tourists in sight. Middle Eastern traders like my father might have started to trickle in search of prosperity, but me, I have no business being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for reading that. And you do mention at the beginning of that section about the two-state solution. I want to ask about a particular aspect of this book, and that's the politics. This is clearly a political book. For me, I read it as a political book, and I get the feeling as I'm reading that what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring back a political issue that maybe has been marginalized a bit over the last few years. Mm-hmm. So is that why you wrote the book?
Well, primarily I wrote the book because I knew I had a great story to tell. Just two Palestinians that are very at odds with each other, moving to China, and that whole story was interesting. But also because, yes, I feel like especially second-generation Palestinians in diaspora have assimilated into other cultures, and the identity has become so diluted, or there simply isn't enough written about them. So I felt like I needed to be a voice in this lacuna. It's not really there's some great work, but it's just not enough, you know. And also, I really wanted to write it in English because there are so many negative stereotypes about Palestinians, and I really wanted to dispel them, and I wanted to write a brutally honest story that would humanize the Palestinian plight and just shed some light on it. But also, one thing, you know that famous saying that Ben Gurion said that the old will die and the young will forget. So I'm like, no way, man, it's not gonna happen. I'm gonna write this book.
So we wanted to have some images on screen right now, if we could, which I think relate a little bit to this particular question that I was just asking you about and that you've started to answer, and I want to go a little bit deeper into your answer. Some of these images that we're going to see are kind of images that I think we're all familiar with. And not just here in the Middle East. I think Americans are familiar with these images, Europeans are familiar. They're images that are very dry. Oftentimes they're rather negative. They're images that relate to conflict and war. They're images that we've seen for decades, and we still see them. Whenever the issue of Palestine comes up, it's usually brought up mainly in a very limited context related to conflict. And as I read your book, you are actually trying to, you don't shy away from the political sort of part that we're familiar with. In fact, you continue to emphasize it and you try to tell the story in a different way. But then you do something else that's very, very interesting, where you try to create a narrative that presents Palestine pre-1948 in a completely different way. And as we go through these images, I think the next two, and hopefully you can reflect on that, are more like the story that you're trying to tell. So why are you doing that? What's the reason for that specifically?
It happened because I received a book, a very rare book about my little village in the north. It was given to me by someone who knew someone in Burj al-Brajna, the refugee camp in Lebanon, and that refugee camp specifically has over 90% of its refugees are from my town. So he gave me this book that was all about El-Kabri. And the cover was, there was a picture of this very lush garden with waterfalls and fruits, and it really looked like the Garden of Eden. And obviously I read the whole book and studied it to death. And this little village had 4 springs, which together formed the biggest water source in Palestine. So it was like the Garden of Eden. It was a very simple life, but it was based on family and agriculture. And so yeah, it's the truth. This was what it looked like. Yeah.
The fact that it's a book that's hopefully going to be published to an audience. It's a global audience, of course, nowadays. However, if it's written in English and it hopefully succeeds in America and Europe, they're definitely going to be reading about a Palestine that they've probably never heard of before. And in fact, it sort of reverses what they think about what the land was like and what it is like now. And I think you made a very conscious decision to clarify that point.
Well, yeah, this little village was one of the very first to be occupied. And the first thing they did was redirect the springs up to the north to completely dry it up. And they established this little kibbutz like a few kilometers away, and they called it Kibbutz Kabri, which is very creative of them. And yeah, so there are no references to it other than this book.
Well, now there will be.
Now there are 2.
Yeah, now there will be. All right, the next sort of big topic related to the memoir is related to personal stories. Mm-hmm. It's related to what I felt quite strongly as I read the book. It's almost like you're healing as you're writing. There's a very clear attempt to face your demons in this book. How comfortable are you going public with private matters?
Okay, so once the decision has been made to write a memoir, there's really, you gotta go all the way or you don't go there at all. So that's one. But for the last 2 years, I have been sharing pieces of this memoir abroad with people who don't know me well. This is the first time I share any excerpt here, so it's a very different story, because obviously I know a lot of people here, and I have a friend who read the memoir who said she's known me all her life, and she said, now I know why you are the way you are. So it's very revealing. But yeah, this is memoir. You have to divulge, you have to expose, you have to go all the way if you want it to resonate with anyone.
So this might be a good opportunity to ask you, because you did go through that journey of facing kind of the fear that every writer has, whether they're young or even old, about whether, you know, they should be writing what they actually lived, whether they should mask that as fiction, whether they should just say that it really happened to them. What kind of advice would you give any writer, young or old, regarding how to sort of do that?
Okay, so when I first started writing stories, which is not long ago, by the way, it's only 5 years ago, I used to always be attracted to comedy, because I felt like with comedy, or at least in my view at the time, you can just make fun of people and not know their motives and not go deep inside why they do what they do or feel the way they do. And at one point I just felt like I need compassion. I need to speak from a place of vulnerability and brutal honesty and crack myself open if I am to, as I said, resonate with anyone out there. So I had to dig very deep inside and just get everything out. And I think that's the advice I would give. Just be vulnerable, be honest. Know your craft very well.
Okay, thank you. We could talk about the memoir for a long time, but I think we're going to move on now to the next part, which is poetry. And the book that we're going to talk about is a chapbook. It's called Cairo, the Undelivered Letters, and it's a poetry collection. It's not very big, but
it's a chapbook, yeah.
But it's it's a chapbook. But it's really packed with a lot. Could you tell us a little bit about more about the idea behind this chapbook, how you chose this particular collection of stories, and what is it all about?
Okay, Cairo, the Undelivered Letters was my end-of-year project, year one at Oxford, and I chose to write a poetry collection. And I had just finished reading On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, and this book is a letter to his mother, who's illiterate, who ultimately won't be able to read the book. And that really inspired me to just explore the world of letters. And I found out many things about letters as a writing form. Letters usually speak of unsurvivable conditions and yet travel very far. They're usually secrets told in confidence, carried in stealth, discoverable in trunks, published in newspapers, and still run the risk of falling in the wrong hands. A letter writer will speak with conviction about truths and yet present one version, his or her own, and in an ongoing narrative they can only provide fragments. So all these properties got me really curious about how I can experiment with letter writing in poetry. And then a friend of mine who's actually here today once told me 5 years ago about the Friday Mail, Barit al-Goma, who that was run in Ahram for 30 years. And she told me it's a treasure trove of Cairene stories. So one thing led to another, and I'm like, okay, so let's do a poetry collection that's kind of like an advice column, okay, where typically letter writers will send their problems to the editor-in-chief, and he'll make a selection and give his advice, and that goes to print. And then like, okay, what if it's undelivered letters? Because, you know, undelivered letters can be a metaphor for Egypt, you know, all these screams trapped in envelopes, you know, the unheard, the unseen. And I'm like, okay, this makes sense. So I I went to a second-hand shop and I found volumes of the Friday Mail, and I bought one called Fatah min Qa al-Madina, and I just tried to make as broad a selection as possible, but I also had predetermined that I want my selection to be decadent and dark and seedy, and, you know, like the underbelly of society, like the parts of Cairo that when you stare out of a window, you just want to close your eyes, you know, that these people that are completely unheard. So that's kind of like the selection that I made. Yeah.
On that note, can you read us a few of them? And without us begging?
Should I go there?
It's up to you if you want to read them here, if you want to read them at the podium. It seems like the podium is malfunctioning, so you might want to just read them here.
Okay. This one's called Dust is Dead Skin. Dear editor, skies without a pore tonight, it cannot sweat, and all the slums of Cairo have lost to dust. As far as the eye can see, I see nothing, only the then and now, but there is all but out of sight. Dust is skin, they say, dead, once mouth to mouth, breasts, bellies, legs, spooned on brass beds, gathering hands together wrapped past houseboats on the Nile, or did we not once? Dust is a whore I loved, and she's everywhere. The cabarets on Haram Street, pumping heat into men, spinning her long hair like a fan, lapping cash on sweaty chest. And in this dust, on my mirror, I run my index finger, and all I see is a sliver of me, clearly. The rest is all old pollen and hair and stars undone, exploding. A megalopolis, a humdrum, and a sphinx stunned by God knows what. Heart drops in dark, raw drawers. I close, I open, look for a love lost to emerge. Light is a lie, I say, flicking the switch. Just look at all those shutters shut, and all the haze like cotton thick. I light the incense, burn the hash, until my mind turns to ash, and skin is elsewhere, gone. Stay well, a Cairean. Thank you. I don't know how many I should read. Just tell me to stop when you get bored. Okay, this is called Minor. Dear editor, I cannot pronounce my name, but I know in Cairo 8,000 babies are born a day, and I'm none of them. Dawn prayers are Mr. Malik's hands, and if this letter falls in the wrong hands, Mama will never forgive. Hands and brain forever lit and neon black, I ask this glow-in-the-dark sky to love, but it's busy burning. Buttered lips and broken neck bone, and I wish he would have touched me because of a summer song or the light changing. These doors are not curse-proof, and yet you need to know the truth, and the truth is I'm divisible by a million. His beard there on a prayer mat, smoked and cigarettes, is a lie. Only Mama is fed for free. I'd like to expand your knowledge of decimals, he says, and I breach slowly while he brims. Pours my milk in a rocks glass, wide-rimmed as if things add up. I say no, just once, then crack. Every time he comes, I pray for life to stop the file, to leaf, to if, to be God again. Respectfully, a minor. Should I read one more or two? I don't know. I'll just read one more. Okay, this is the very last poem in the collection, and it's actually Cairo answering back after 12 poems by the readers. Okay, so this is Cairo. Cairean, you who tell yourself you are a beautiful song of faith when half the fish in the Nile aren't fit for your consumption. Hobnobbing with kings and caliphs in a hieroglyph no longer your mother tongue. Your mother calls you wahsh, grizzly, the rickety bones of destiny, built in you like I am, genetically. Over Abbas Bridge, subterranean girls aghast give pass to your ass grab and accept the bribe reluctantly. Dear mother, I've been touched by more than hands, but she's conditioned to subtract only. Your great-grands cried on mosque walls over a man to bind to a bed mythically. But the grown men have never combed a girl's hair, and the girls give hugs to eerie men awkwardly. More internet cafes than homes, and every minute a phone dings and a TikTok star is born than nothinged and big banged. The post office in the city of the dead is where the bone collectors go to mail Friday weekly. At night, they play dominoes with crows and cry over women they love viciously. Dust is a bed cover, and under is where you tuck your fetish for obscenity. And on all the rooftops, incantations to reincarnate the old top dogs in gold and ivory. Dear Sheikh, brother, Pharaoh, holy drugger, show me where to kiss and how to persist in matters of my own expiry. How to hide behind hours like streets congested, like phlegm ill-timed and stretching bumper to bumper from the citadel to the satellite city. 1,000 minarets and no sidewalks and pigeons circling atop, drowsed by prayers, doused in liquid smoke. They nosedive towards cars and on windshields drop and cease to flap. Al-Qahira is not a name, it's an energy in a vein, noisy. Mini mulids, river cruising, speakers pulsing shabby music, garland lit in incandescent saffron, mint, and myriads decked in strings of Arabian jasmine. Palms like monuments raised domeward, a rugged lifeline etched in mammoth skyline, strung high, high-strung, and all yours truly, Cairo. Thank you.
So the reading was very, very beautiful, and the other thing about this book is that the form of the actual book is very, very interesting and has its own character. We have this interesting device here that we can show exactly what I'm talking about. So you said that this was based on Barid al-Goma, and they are letters to the editor. So you've designed the book to actually look like an envelope, and then when you open it, you have the poems, and then the poems are written in different forms. The typeface and the way the text is laid out. How did this come about? How did you actually come up with this form?
Form or the design of the book?
If you could talk about both, that would be great.
Okay, form, like any other literary device, needs to expand the meaning of whatever work you're doing. So, in this case, which poem would you like me to comment on? Like maybe the first one? The first one is the editor-in-chief. He's on the top floor of this news corporation, and he's looking down through the smog at Cairo, and he's just blaming Cairo for never answering any of the letters. And in my head, I wanted it to look like, like he's like Zeus on the mountain looking down at this like dilapidated city, and I wanted it to look like a toppled pyramid. So that's the idea of this poem. And maybe I can comment on Red Dress. Red Dress. It's,
as we get to Red Dress, we can see the rest, though.
Yeah, this is Red Dress. Red Dress is a poem about a woman who kind of has a nervous breakdown after being ditched by her, whatever, her partner. And she's crying, and she's like dressed in a like compromising way, and she's walking down the street, and she's just almost hallucinating. So I wanted to contrast that with this very blocky, bold form, and also like to show that it's kind of a tirade or a rant where she doesn't even stop to catch her breath. And I wanted it to look kind of like a fist, like something really closed. And that's the idea here.
If you don't mind, I'll leaf through a little bit more because there's other aspects, especially near the end. Yeah, why does this go like this?
Well, this is because it was Cairo answering back. So this one took me.
This is the one you read.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last one.
Yeah. This took me the longest to write because, like, how can you impersonate Cairo? Like, it's so big. So I wanted it to have this huge scope, and since Cairo is answering every letter writer in this collection, I wanted them to be scattered as if Cairo's just looking at this person and addressing him, and then this person and addressing her. So I wanted it to look like a sprawling megalopolis, so that's the idea here.
So in the memoir, you also choose to do some interesting things with form. In the parts about China, you include Chinese characters in the actual dialogue, and then there's also this very interesting thing that as we read, we become really sort of engaged with. There's a lot of international phone calls. So instead of saying where the phone call is coming from, you use the area code. So you say like +961 is calling, +202 is calling, +971, things like that. I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, this it's just a device that I use throughout the book to show time zones and mileage and diaspora, like the idea of just distance, time and distance. Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the final part of our talk today, which is about literary translation. And the book that we're going to discuss is This Is What It Has Come to Be, Hawda al-Lisar. And this particular book was published to coincide with the centenary of AUC and also the centenary of the 1919 revolution. And it was a pretty impressive project. It involved remastering a lot of songs by Sayyid Darwish, and also this very interesting thing about translating them, translating these colloquial Egyptian songs into English. That must have come with its own challenges. How did you end up getting involved in this project?
So I got a call one day from Dr. Samia Mahriz. She said, "Would you like to translate Sayyid Darwish?" I'm like, "Sure, I'd love that." Not really thinking of how hard this project was going to be. Like for me, I grew up listening to Sayyid Darwish on TV, or like Iman al-Bahri Darwish sang all his songs in Tazwir fi Awraq Rasmiya, which is a movie I love. And then you have Al-Ayal Kibrit and you have Ali al-Haggar. Like we all grew up with listening to Sayyid Darwish if we grew up in the 80s and 90s. So I said yes immediately. And then I discovered that it's really difficult because, first of all, it's outdated. It's language that was used more than 100 years ago. It's colloquial, Alexandrian, mixed with cosmopolitan Alexandria, with like all the Armenian words transmutating, and Italian and Greek and Turkish and French and English. So you have slang, you have words that are transmogrified across time and space from like cosmopolitan Alexandria going into the back streets of Alexandria and the alleyways. So it was very difficult. And so yes, I just got stuck. Some days I would get stuck on one word for hours. And
is it a prerequisite that you have to be a poet to translate poetry?
I think it would be at a strong advantage if you are a poet, yeah.
Okay, so that worked out pretty well. How about the fact that there's so much of this translation that kind of relies on the intricate structure of the songs, the metaphor, the fact that all of those have different associations in each language. I think we're going to be more specific about that. We're going to play one of the songs right now. So we're going to play Bint Masr, Daughter of Egypt. If we could cue that up, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some very specific parts of that song. Can you read us a part of that? Yeah. Can you read us a part of it in Arabic and then in English?
Okay. I'll read you the Arabic first. Okay. ده بنت مصر. ده بقف مين ده اللي يقلس على بنت مصر بأنهي وش والنبي يجري يتليس ما طلع كلامه طز فش النوه 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 هي شغل البكش ده يا أختي ما بقاش ينفعنا دلوقتي المصرية كتر خيرها في التربية سبقت غيرها يا سيدي أنت البنت تفضل محبوسة الجوه بيتها يكون أظبط واللي يقولوا عليه موسى يمكن يكون فرعون والله العفو العفو يا سلام يا سلام يا اخوانا دي العبرة ما هياش في جوه ولا بره عمر الحرة ما تبقى عرة وعمر العرة ما تبقى حرة يا سيدي انت باردون يا فندي بالذمة ايه بس عيب المصرية الدنيا ضاقت بيك لما ما تاخدش غير الأفرنجية افهم واعقل يهبل يهبل ليه غيرنا يفرقنا ما تخلي زيتنا في دقيقنا المصرية تبيض وشك والأفرنجية عينها في قرشك يا سيدي انت I'll stop here. Okay, so this song was inspired by the martyrdom of two Egyptian women during the 1919 revolution. Just giving you the context, and I will now read you some of the English. What dunce would denounce the daughter of Egypt? I hereby announce, you shut up at once. Zip it. Shh. Do not, do not, do not. Not her, not her, not her. Sister, what's this nonsense? It really makes no sense, and hence, in her defense, I'll say, God bless. She can raise children like no other. Girl, the girl will remain locked in, they say, to save her from sin. Once a bride, she can come and go. Before that, though, she is no show. Better than running free. Excuse me, excuse me. The moral of the story has no sheen, no glory, and here we must disagree. The free one is not a disgrace. The disgraced are never free. Man, pardon, Effendi, please do tell me, what fault do you find honestly? Are there no Egyptian women left around? So the foreigner you chase and hound. Understand, grow up, you dunce. Stop here.
So can you break down some of the specific things in that sample and how it was a little bit difficult and challenging to do that?
It's very difficult. Okay, we'll start with baf. Baf, looking it up, but you can't really look at these words, find these words in a dictionary, so you have to rely on live knowledge around you, like you ask on Facebook or you ask people from a different generation. And I really have my parents to thank. I was calling them every day, like, يعني إيه بقف, يعني إيه بيرزونا, يعني إيه علاولة. So مثلا بقف literally means a sack, but we use it, or it used to be used to say fool about someone. You're a fool, and بقف. That's one. I used the word dunce just to rhyme with denounce. بأنهي wish, for example, in Arabic means the audacity of it, you know, but you can't really translate it as with any face, with what face, you know, you need to find another way. So what else I have here? يتليس. يتليس is a word that has to do with construction, which is very apt because we're talking about Sayyid Darwish, who was the voice of the laborers and the artisans and all that. So يتليس literally means plastering and construction, the way you mix cement with sand and lime and water. But here it means plaster, like zip it. So I used zip it instead, which in that process of translation, you have to lose a lot of the meaning. It's because there are so many associations that are very culturally specific. But you try to compensate, like, you know, you lose all the meanings in the word, but you like try to get the rhyme right or try to reinsert the meaning somewhere else, and it's constantly a process of rearranging and yeah.
Okay, we're gonna hear one more song, El Sa'ayin. If we can cue up El Sa'ayin, please.
عالسقايين دول شقيانين متعفراتين بالكوبانية خواجاتها جونا حيطفشونا ليه بيرازونا في صنعة أبونا ما تعبرونا يا خلايق عملوها فينا طيب رضينا ما يلزقونا ويشغلونا وينفعونا يا اخوانا اشمعنا يعني بولوا ويني ياكلوا الصهية وياخدوا المهية من الكوبانية علاولة وابن البلد دي يطفح الدردي ما يتعدلش يمكن ما يطولش يتعشى طرشي يعوض الله يهون الله ويعوض الله.
Okay. Can you do us the pleasure of reading a little bit of that one too? Thanks.
يعوض الله يهون الله. عالسقايين دول شقيانين متعفرتين من الكوبانية خواجاتها جونا حيطفشونا ليه بيرزونا دي صنعة أبونا ما تعبرونا يا خلايق عملوها فينا طيب وردينا ما يلزقونا ويشغلونا وينفعونا يا إخوانا اشمعنا يعني باولو وياني ياكلوا الصينية وياخدوا المهية ما الكوبانية علاولة وابن البلد يطفح الدردي ما يتعدلش يمكن ما يطولش يتعشى ترشي يعوض الله يهون الله. It's just part of it. It's very complicated. So, oh, I have to read the English. Okay. May God ease, may God appease. Wretched are those water sellers, enraged by the new company. The foreigners replaced us dwellers, and now look at our misery. It's our forefathers' occupation. How about some accommodation? We stayed quiet as they did the deed. Are they planning to pay us heed? Why should they eat fancy food on a tray and from the company receive the high pay, while we landsmen just eat leftovers? Pickles for dinner. May God ease, may God ease, may God appease.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think it's about time we ask the audience to join us in the conversation. Would anyone like to make a comment or ask May a question? I think there's someone right there.
Well, two questions. One, is anybody in China interested in Arabic literature, whether written in English or Arabic?
Is anyone interested in Arabic literature?
In China, since you were in China.
Was anyone in China interested in Arabic literature?
Yeah.
Oh, I had a huge communication problem there. We walked around with interpreters everywhere, so I didn't make any friends in China.
Okay. What about Palestinian science fiction?
Palestinian science fiction?
Yeah.
I know that this exists. I have heard of Palestinian science fiction, but I haven't read it yet. So, yeah, it's there, but it's not my genre, or maybe at this point it's not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Where can I find your book of poetry?
That's unfortunately they only printed a limited edition of 100 copies. It's being sold in the Center for Book Arts in New York, but they have a website. I think Dr. Feriel tried to order it and with no success. I don't know what the deal is, but I am actively trying to get it published in Egypt right now.
And your other books?
The translation of Said Darwish is in the UN, and you can order it online. The memoir is in the process of being published now.
Thanks.
There's a question in the back. Yeah, way in the back.
I just want to ask that you have lived in Palestine, Cairo, China, and you have written this book also in 3 parts. So while writing the Cairo part, does the Palestinian identity affects that part? Or writing the Palestinian part, you have lived in Cairo and China, does this identity affect that parts?
I'm sorry, I'm not very clear. Can you repeat?
You have lived in 3 countries, right? Palestinian?
I never lived in Palestine, no.
You have never lived in Palestine, but you have written in this book the Palestinian side.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and you have lived in Cairo.
Most of my life, yes.
Most of your life. So, living in Cairo, having a Cairo identity, does that affects your writing about Palestinian?
You mean, do I look at Palestine from a Cairean lens?
Yes.
I have no idea. It is a very imagined place in my head, so I can't say that. But one good example is I was just discussing it with my sister. The part where I say mara. It's a horrible word, and I hated hearing it growing up. But she was telling me because you live in Egypt, it has negative connotations. But for Lebanese and Palestinian men, it's not derogatory at all. So that's an example of, yeah, maybe that's my Cairean lens looking at, a Levantine word. Yeah.
Hi. So I have a couple of questions. First is in reference to a quote that you said, and I'm kind of linking it to this whole issue of why we write in English, maybe as opposed to Arabic. You mentioned the quote of the old die and the young will forget. Yeah. And you were very upset about that. And I very much agree with that sentiment. When you think about that sentence and you think about the audience that you're writing for, are you consciously thinking of that audience? Like, do you have a specific audience in mind that this creation is carrying on to? And do you think that that in any way should or does affect the language that you choose to write in?
For sure, yes. I have two target audiences in mind, but obviously this is an international book because it moves between so many countries. But yeah, like I do have the Western, English-speaking world in mind because I want to change the narrative. I want to humanize these people. I want to write a book that kind of gets the attention of your spine, like slaps you into attention. And I've tried to do it at the highest level of craft so that it's kind of presentable to that English-speaking reader, like, do I get your attention now? Is this a story that you can, attend to? So yes, definitely. Was there another part to your question? Okay.
Hello. I've got a quick question on behalf of some young student writers that are here in the audience. This is a question that they often ask me, and I hear them asking each other and things like this. And it's about, as an Egyptian writer who's working in English, what is some advice that you'd give in terms of pursuing publishing? Because there aren't many options here in the region. I mean, there's obviously AUC Press and Hupo and things like that. But what path did you take, and what advice would you give them?
Publishing?
Yes.
Okay, so when I first started writing, I would go with anyone who accepted my work. The beginning, like, I don't care if they're known or not known, let's just get my work published. And as I grew up and grew into that field, I began to be more selective, but it's just getting the work out there, constantly writing and reading and being in touch with other writers and networking and forming writing groups where you can give feedback and work on your craft together. This was the part that really improved my writing, like having this writing group where every week one of us would be one of us's turn to like give the work, and everyone else would give feedback, constructive feedback. So that's how it worked. At the beginning, it was like small, unknown publications, and then become like more. We want to get into the big ones. It's just a process. So yeah.
Hi, Mike. I had a quick question about the memoir, and okay, it makes sense to me that it's a hybrid text with various different forms, ranging from poetry to letters, and then ordinary prose, I guess, is also in there. I think my question is, how did you make decisions for the different parts of the book to appear in these different forms? And then once you had them, did the form inform the structure and how you organized the book, or, yeah?
Well, I had just finished Cairo, the Undelivered Letters, so letters were very fresh in my head, and it made sense that the Palestinian sections, because they're nostalgic and because they were so intimate, for them to be more lyrical, more poetic, and also it made sense to have a letter addressed to my dad posthumously, where I recount things that he avoided, after his exile. He avoided talking about Palestine. He did not tell us about our history, So I had to discover all that by myself. So recounting all that in letter form, it was my way of trying to heal him and heal myself at the same time. So that's one part. But for example, like the opening pages, I was very clear that I wanted just to grab you like this from the very beginning. So I started with a kind of a very violent scene, And then it slows down and gets into Palestine and the letter form and all that. But then I felt like sometimes it was so fast-paced and action-packed where the reader needed a break. They needed to breathe. So that's when I would switch to essay form, reflection, you know. And that's it. That's how it worked. But every section, even if it was in a different genre, it had to kind of like lead into the other. Like I would hold one string from one section and start with the next, so that it flows. Yeah. Was there another part to your question? Combined questions confuse me always. Yeah. Okay.
Hi.
I think we have time for one more question. You're going to be the last question.
Hi. I have one question about
Where are you?
back there.
Yeah.
Hi. I have one question about the Said Darwish translation. You mentioned that the Arabic form of it was a bit outdated, and I was wondering about when you were doing the English translation, how much were you aware of the language of the era? Like, were you taking liberties with perhaps making it more modern in English so that it's more understandable and more accessible, especially to Western audience? Or were you trying to match the language of that era, say Egypt in the 1920s or 30s, depending on when the poem was exactly, like the Arabic poem was written? Thank you. That was a fantastic talk, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, so there was a choice to make at the beginning. Do I want to go slang? Or do I want to go colloquial, like just, you know, presentable colloquial? So I decided to go with, you know, like colloquial instead of slang. That was one decision I made. What else did you say? Sorry, I lose track in the middle of a question.
Were you affected by the way people talked in that era?
It's a balance, you know. I try to relay it as much as possible to the English reader without abandoning, you know, the Arabic. But at the same time, you know, they say poetry is untranslatable because there are so many considerations. Yani. Meter, metaphor, ambiguities, associations, where the line breaks, what it looks like on the page. So I try to, it's a loss and gain, as I said, so I try to like hold the asaya from the middle, you know, as much as possible. Yeah.
I really appreciate that everybody you know, came out tonight for this talk, and I hope that we were able to address a lot of the issues that you had in mind or your expectations when you heard that we were having a talk series in English. Again, we're going to have a continuing group of people talking about this subject over the next few months, so we hope to see you again. And thank you again for coming, and most of all, thank you, May, for your candor and you know, all of the experience that you gave us and the audience on these issues. I think it was extremely useful, and it was also very, very entertaining. And that, in the end, is a really powerful combination. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for hosting, and thank you for coming. Thank you.